Hey everyone, Zian over here from Nintendo Life, and today we're here to share with you our review of Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by Chris Scullion for NintendoLife.com, but was reworked into this video by me. When it comes to Pokemon spin-offs, the Mystery Dungeon series is probably the lengthiest. For every short-lived game like Pokemon Dash or Pokémon Tournament, there's a Mystery Dungeon title offering potentially hundreds of hours of gameplay. Of course, whether you'd actually want to play one of them for hundreds of hours is the real question. This is a genre that's a bit of an acquired taste. Depending on how you count them, Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX is the 7th entry in the series, but it's also a remake of the original Red and Blue Rescue Team on Game Boy Advance and DS, and as a result, this dilemma hasn't really changed. Just like in the original, Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX has you playing as a human who wakes up one day to discover they've turned into a Pokémon. With no memory of who you used to be before the transformation because, well, RPGs, your aim is to find out more about your past, or at least it would be, were if not for the other Pokemon who befriend you at the start of the game and insist you start a rescue team with them. Cue a seemingly endless series of missions that have you visiting one of the game's many procedurally generated dungeons, and usually rescuing a Pokemon or retrieving an item on a specific floor of said dungeon. Naturally, as you level up your characters and progress through the game, you have to reach higher floor numbers, turning even the most basic missions into lengthy expeditions. Exploring these dungeons is a straightforward enough process. Like in other games in the series, everything's turn-based and set on an invisible grid, so each time you step forward or perform a move, the enemies on the map do the same. When you encounter one, battles take place in the same environment, instead of cutting away to a separate fight screen, meaning where your team members are positioned on the grid can sometimes be very important. Combat is slightly different here to the way it was in the original, whereas in that game, pressing the A button used a generic attack that didn't use up any PP. That attack doesn't exist anymore, and you instead have to rely on your Pokemon's 4 actual moves. As such, this time the A button automatically chooses what the game thinks is the best attack for your current situation, though you can override it by holding ZR and choosing your move from a list. This does have its benefits, however. Battles are generally shorter, but it does mean your moves run out of PP more regularly, requiring you to frequently top them up in lengthier dungeons. Pokemon recruitment is also different this time around, and it too brings its own plusses and minuses. As in the original, you can only recruit Pokemon you find in the dungeons if you've unlocked a specific camp that they can stay in. Whereas before, the majority of these camps required you to beat the main storyline or perform other tasks before you could access them. Though, this time, as long as you have the money, you can buy any of the 45 camps whenever you feel like by visiting the Wigglytuff shop in your town square. Now what's even better though is if you encounter and recruit a Pokemon during a mission but realize you don't actually own their camp, you can use a fairly common Wigglytuff orb to contact Wigglytuff from inside the dungeon and buy the camp there and then, meaning when the mission ends, they'll move into the camp instead of wandering off into the sunset. Now this is a huge improvement over the previous game, where you simply couldn't recruit a wild Pokemon if you didn't have their camp yet. Which sounds pretty good so far, right? Except for the fact that this whole recruitment system gets a bit overzealous. In the original, your party size during dungeon exploration was limited to 4 Pokemon, meaning you could only recruit 1 or 2 new Pokemon during each mission. On top of this, there was a maximum size of 6 blocks, which meant you couldn't go around with a squad of 4 Onix or anything like that. This time, you can now recruit up to 5 Pokemon on top of your own squad of 3. Given that some missions also have a guest Pokemon accompanying you, that means you can potentially have a squad of 9 wandering around your dungeon, like the Reservoir Dogs, and some of them can even be big ones too. While this sounds brilliant, it can throw up some really irritating moments. Your potential squad size may now be more than double what it was before, but the dungeons themselves aren't any bigger. As a result, jamming 9 Pokemon into a small corridor is a bit ridiculous, especially when you encounter an enemy who's best defeated by a Pokemon at the back of the queue, and you have to try and get them to the front. The long tail your squad creates also means if you try to leave a room as an enemy enters from the other side, you'll regularly be held up as they start a fight with Pokémon at the end of your line. Essentially, while it's brilliant to be able to recruit up to 5 new Pokémon in each mission, the game isn't really built to properly accommodate a squad of that size, and things can feel claustrophobic as a result. Other changes are more generally positive. You can now press the plus button to toggle between the 3 main Pokémon in your squad, meaning you can control any of them at any point as you see fit. And as a bonus, your character's belly meter, which has to be regularly filled up to stop them from losing health, only empties when you're controlling them directly, which means if your Pokémon is getting peckish and you're low on food, you can switch to another and prevent their hunger from reaching a dangerous level. Then there are odder additions, such as the auto mode. This can be activated at any time by hitting the L button, and it basically plays the game for you. Your Pokémon will wander the dungeon, either generally exploring or specifically in search of the steps to the next level, which you can decide in the options menu, and will only stop when you encounter an enemy. Once you take over and beat the enemy, you can then turn auto mode back on and sit back. So ultimately, this edition is more of an indictment of the game's issues than anything we could explain ourselves. This is an absolutely gorgeous game, with a lovely art style that makes it look like everything's been sketched with pencils and painted with watercolors, and the plot, while a little convoluted, is still charming enough to keep you invested throughout. That said, anyone who's played a Mystery Dungeon game before, be it a Pokémon one or anything else, will know that they can get extremely repetitive. When you get to the point where you're hitting dungeons with 80 or 90 floors, it takes a special type of patience to stay entertained for that long, without your eyes glazing over a tiny bit. This new auto mode also confirms this better than we can. The whole point of this game is exploring dungeons, and if one of your main selling points is, hey, you don't have to actually explore the dungeons, don't worry, we'll just play the game for you. There's no better confirmation that this can be a chore at times. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX is a beautiful game with potentially hundreds of hours of gameplay, but there's still no getting away from the fact that this is a 15-year-old Game Boy Advance title at its core. The dungeon crawling genre has evolved over the years to try and make things feel less repetitive, and while Rescue Team DX does add some features to try to modernize the process a bit, they tend to fall flat. It's still fun in bursts, it just gets repetitive too quickly. We here at Nintendo Life give Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX on the Nintendo Switch a 6 out of 10. If you'd like to read our full written review, you can find that along with more info on Pokémon and the Mystery Dungeon series over at nintendolife.com.